Okay, so you can all see this now. So like I said, my name is Shang Biswas. Below that, just some deets. That's my Twitter. That is my itch.io, and that is my website, which is unfortunately woefully out of date during the pandemic because everything has been terrible, and that is not something I have been focusing on. The website, I mean. A little bit about me. I used to be a bioengineer. I have 2 bioengineering degrees before I said, no, I don't want to do that anymore. And I went to art school. And now I do weird things like this, right? I have shown interactive work in a number of institutions. I teach a number of places. I have faculty status at Fordham. I had it at ICP, but then the MFA program I taught at shut down, so that's a completely different thing. I've written and continue to write for a number of publications, magazines. I have won Indiecade and IGDN awards for games, and one of my works was I like the Nebula Award because it's aspirational, because one time it was on the long list, so that was exciting. Aspirational. I have not won the Nebula. I'm not trying to deceive you with that. I write a lot about games, so you can see a lot of my writing about games, and I make a lot of kinds of games, right? So I made the Mad Science Foundation game with my co-designer Max. I wrote for the Holy game. I write a lot for tabletop role-playing games. These are games that commission me to write for them. I also make my own tabletop role-playing games, some of which have won some accolades. Honestly, I would say that's primarily the medium I'm currently doing the most in, tabletop role-playing games and the like. Interactive theater and LARP are kind of related to that. Like I said, LARP as well. On the left is one of my proudest ones. My co-designer Nick O'Leary and I made the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance LARP for the Museum of the Moving Image, where I'm currently artist in residence. And then recently, Lucian Khan and I we got 2 grants to make Honey and Hot Wax, which is an anthology of LARPs and tabletop role-playing games talking about sex. But what this talk is about is interactive fiction, and just a quick background, interactive fiction work. If you haven't heard of Sub-Q magazine, I would check it out if you're into interactive fiction. I published a couple of stories in there, the Book of Chroma, Time to Feed, and I also wrote a column about interactive fiction. I think I have 6 essays in that. So if you want to read more of my work about interactive fiction, which is some of what we're discussing today, check out Sub-Q magazine. Last year for Dungeons and Dragons live event, I was part of the design team for the whole event, but also I wrote an interactive fiction story for them. And end of last year, I kickstarted with my co-editor Cleo Yansu Davis a anthology of interactive fiction about sex and sexuality that is coming out this fall in the magazine Strange Horizons, which, if you're in the fiction world, as some of you undoubtedly are, you might have heard of. It is a magazine primarily online, as in that's how I access it, of speculative fiction, and we got a number of really cool authors to contribute to this anthology. One quick note is that today I'm talking about the power of the hyperlink, not in this was supposed to be, a nice transitional white screen in a PowerPoint that looks cool. Now it's, a PDF widescreen. But anyway, we're talking about it not in terms of this, the digital humanities sense of hypertext, which is talked about a lot, right? About how hypertext changes the way we perceive of information, and how, we have the Memex device, and we have the history of the hyperties, and we have, that is not my focus of my talk today. I'm not going to look at this like technological breakthrough of hyperlink, and I'm also not going to look at it in terms of what does this do to literary theory when we have non-linear literature. That kind of work has been done already. Like, I refer you to more knowledgeable, more scholarly, and much more brilliant authors, such as Espen Arseth and the like, to look into that. What I'm going to focus a bit more on is how we can use hyperlinks in interactive fiction as designers, as game designers, and as writers of interactive fiction, right? That is where I come from. I'm not really a scholar. I am on the faculty of some universities, but I'm not a scholar, right? I'm not as qualified stalker scholarly vein about that. Okay, just to put it out there, what to expect. First off, the hyperlink, when most people think about it, we think about it as a form of navigation, right? So this actually is a screenshot of the D&D live game that I made. It's about two boys who go into the woods to like find a hidden stash of meat and end up fighting zombies. One of them ends up discovering he's a sorcerer, and because I wrote this and I tend to write things like this, they end up also realizing they're in love with each other, because I love writing like gay subplots in all my stories. But when people think of hyperlink, they primarily think of, oh, what the hyperlink does is allow you to travel between things, right? If it's like web pages, whatever, it's between like piece of information, whatever. If we talk about an interactive fiction sense, it allows you to travel between scenes, right? This does two things. First, it gives your game, your story, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably for the purpose of this talk. It gives your game a sense of navigable space, right? Janet Murray and Hamlet on the Holodeck talked about one of the affordances of video games, of the computational system as a game platform. One of the affordances being navigable space. It allows the player to feel like they are traveling within a space, right? And by that, I'm going to extend what she said in a way that I don't just mean literal space. I mean it becomes like a map that a player knows that, oh, I can travel between and through, right? And this gives the player a sense of agency on its own, not just in terms of, oh, I'm making choices. We're going to talk about choices later at the end, because that is for a big part of interactive fiction, but not the only part of interactive fiction. But even the sense of like just moving between, I click and I go forward, even if it's like a single choice, I'm not actually choosing between a list of things, even that itself gives the player a sense of navigation, of like, I am doing something to move the story forward, to move myself within the story, right? So the very presence of hyperlinks, the very presence of navigable space, even if it's not in fiction, if it's not space, it might be time, it might be continue to move forward, it might be choice of dialogue, but the very presence of this makes the player feel a sense of, cool, I can move from place to place. This gives me a sense of control in this game that I'm playing, right? Which is different from traditional prose, where I'm just like scrolling or turning pages or things like that. Okay, so that is the first effect. By having hyperlinks, automatically you get a sense of agency and control, right? Of course, that is not the only thing, right? And we're going to go back into this idea of choices later on. Next. The second thing is, not all links lead you to a new location, though, right? Cycling links are very popular in platforms such as Twine. Like I said, I'm editing Strange Loves right now, and many of our authors have chosen to use cycling links in a very pointed way. And where's cycling link? So here's an example from a game called Swan Hill by Laura Miche. So the black text there is the link itself, right? So south of Swan Hill, the curve of the river is wide and placid as a lake. If you click on is wide and placid as a lake, it turns into, south of Swan Hill, the curve of the river is smaller than you remember it. And at the start of the game, Laura Miche makes it clear that when you click on a black link, it's a cycling link, which means, as you saw here, clicking on it will change it within the same sentence. It will not take you to a new screen. So clicking on is wide and plastic as a lake changes is wide and plastic on lake to smaller than you remember it. And then clicking on you remember it as a red link will take you to a new screen. But then if you click on small and you remember it again, it will change small than you remember it to muddier than you remember it, right? So a cycling link is when you click on a link and it just changes the link itself within the sentence. So is wide and placid becomes smaller than you remember it, and then small than you remember it becomes muddier than you remember it, right? And then et cetera, et cetera. I didn't continue the example on screen to show more than that, right? But what does this do for the reader when you encounter this, right? Here, rather than taking you to a completely new scene, which tends to convey a sense of progression in a sense, like, okay, the next thing. So when you click on you remember it, it is the next idea, the next thought, the next instance or moment. Instead, this cycling link gives you more nuance, more detail about the thing that you have clicked on, right? So you clicked on is wide and placid as a lake. Is in this story, this is fact, right? The curve of the river is wide and placid. Great. But once you click on that, it becomes opinion. Oh, it's smaller than you remember. It's not just wide and placid. You used to remember it as bigger. And then you click on smaller, and oh, wait, it's also muddier than you remember it. So this conveys, rather than a progression of action, it conveys a progression of thought, right? So I'm looking at this river, and it's wide and placid. It's actually smaller than you thought. Oh, it's actually also muddier than you thought, right? And here, this creates a sort of poetic rhythm, right? You can dictate, well, maybe dictate's the wrong word, but you can suggest to the reader how this protagonist, and remember, in interactive fiction, we are often primed to think of the protagonist as you, right? Second person, but that's not always the case. It can be a third person or first person or whatever, but it can also be a very primed you, right? The you is not you as the player. The you is like, I don't know, overlord of the seven kingdoms, or Cinderella or something, right? So this progression of thoughts where the protagonist slowly realizes things through the cycling links can help do something like build the protagonist's character, or in this case, build the protagonist's interaction with the setting, right? How they are perceiving the setting, simply by slowly dispersing this information by clicking on these cycling links. It can also, and I didn't show an example of this, but it can also show hidden sort of meaning, right? So you can say the river is smaller than you remember it, and you click on smaller, it might change into the river is much smaller than the time you nearly drowned in your childhood, right? And there, that will create this, again, this progression of thoughts, but now it becomes this like surprise almost, like hidden thoughts reveal themselves as you click on the cycling link, right? And this is potent, especially if placed within a larger body of text, right? This south of Swan Hill, the curve is White Desert Lake, is actually excerpted from a larger passage, right? There's more going on in the text after this. And in that case, the ability to click on this cycling link and reveal this progressive information becomes more powerful and more interesting because the rest of the passage stays the same. So it has this poetic effect of, oh, wow, this one detail changing while the rest of the passage is the same, is important and interesting because that's the only thing that's changing. And, the human mind is primed to notice change, right? That creates can create a really startling effect in the reader, right? So not just navigation, you can use different kinds of links, in this case, cycling links, to control the flow of information to the reader, and control the rhythm of which, the rhythm with which the reader accesses information, right? Which can be used for poetic and interesting effects. The other kind of thing you can do with hyperlinks is you can do a hover state, right? So when you click on a link, it takes you somewhere, but when you hover on a link, the form, you can make the form of the link change to suggest something to the reader. This passage is from one of the stories I wrote for Strange Lust, Strange Love. This is like the Kickstarter backer special. So in this game, you are on a date at a burger place with this dude. You're in college, and the ghosts that the burger place used to be a gay club like 20 years ago, and the ghosts of some of the people from who are important to the gay club possess you and make you do all kinds of saucy things, right? So in this game, um, you you move between two times. You move between the present when you're on this date, and you move between the past because when ghosts possess you, you jump back into the past, right? So what happens here is when you hover over a link that takes you to another moment in the present, the link turns yellow. As you see in the top left, a normal link looks green, and if you hover over it, turns yellow to show that this is a link. However, when you jump into a scene that takes you into the past, the link turns pink and the underlining becomes a double underline, and the transition of that causes the text to kind of shiver in front of you, right? So this hover gives the player information. Now, this gives the player information that something different is going to happen, for one, because the first time they see the pink text, it'll be like, whoa, that's different. But it also gives the information that, oh, this is different from this other kind of link. So this other kind of link did something. This is going to do something else. Now, in my game, it is foreshadowing or it's signaling the whole idea of a different time, right? There are other markers that show you in a different time, but it says you are going into the past right now. Take note, things are going to be different. You can also, I imagine, not I imagine, I know, you can also use this as a game mechanic, right? I can imagine a game where it could be a puzzle solving technique where, oh, if you're, I don't know, chasing Jack the Ripper, and certain links are get you closer to his tail, and that hover state will look different, right? And that will tell the players, oh yeah, click on these links, you're going somewhere, right? As a puzzle solving tool. Or, oh, if you go down these links, your story is going to be different because in these links you're going to chase Jack the Ripper. In these links you're not, right? So the very act of looking at the link, right, hovering over the link, can also carry meaning and can be meaningfully used by designers of interactive fiction to communicate stuff. Both in a game design sense, as like, oh, you're going on this path, but also again in a poetic sense, right? And I use poetic kind of liberally today to mean like for text effect, for imagery, and for text effects, right? So kind of like what I did, like you are going to the past now, hover state, okay? But also I hear my Discord beeping. I don't know if it's y'all asking questions or if it's my other Discords. I have too many of them. I'm not looking at that right now. I will look at that at the end of the talk so that I don't get distracted. Um, and then there's the idea of scene shift, and this is close. This is close to the idea what I talked about earlier about navigable space, but it's worth its own point because there is a whole thing in interactive fiction where if any of you in this audience has played a lot of interactive fiction, you might have sometimes found the impulse of you're clicking on a link, you see a passage, and you kind of like skim through the actual text of the passage to like get to the link and click on it, right? It's actually a very human response for like user interface stuff. And so there's a whole thing about like, oh, how long should a text scene be? In my thing, when I make Twine games, different for different platforms. And if you make a choice of games game, if for those of you familiar with that genre, that company, if not, I would check it out. They have some great work. That tends to have longer scenes. But when I make Twine games, I tend to default to very short scenes, right? Because I feel the like format of Twine tends to encourage people to read quick chunks before wanting to click, right? And so hyperlinks are used are used to do these scene shifts. But again, it's not just I have to do a scene shift. The act of adding a scene shift can be poetic itself in of itself, right? So think about stanza breaks or line breaks in a poem, right? In a poem, a line break or a stanza break is a very deliberate choice by the poet because theoretically, especially in a poem where rules of grammar do not apply, you have poetic license to break those. Theoretically, you can just run on everything into one line, right? But when a poet makes a line break, that is a particular thing they are doing to signal some sort of like ending or shift or change or transition, which is the same as change. So apologies. Um, the same thing can be used in interactive fiction games. So again, there's an excerpt from the same game. Um, so you've entered the burger joint. Your burger tastes of grease. Your fries taste of grease. Your milkshake is bran swill with sugar. It tastes of grease. He says, "You're probably wondering why I picked this place tonight. The world shivers." So you notice how this passage has a certain rhythm going with it, right? When you click on the world shivers, it'll turn pink like you saw earlier, and it'll then take you here. Everything is groovy. The cute green-haired twink Rod hired as DJ looks terrified. His beat is stellar, and what more could you ask for? Blah 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 blah, etc. etc. I won't keep reading that out. But notice, for example, how this is a scene in the past, this is a scene in the present, which is why this is pink, this is green, and notice the style of writing, right? Every scene in the present has this staccato kind of style. Oh, by the way, I wrote this, just so you know. So I'm not. I'm doing this because I have permission to show this completely, and I could talk about my intentions for it. But I didn't want you to know things I didn't cite this work. So this is by Sharon Biswas. So notice how this has a staccato kind of rhythm, and this has a much more traditional. I would say, I don't want to say flowy because I don't want to say my prose flows, but there's a more traditional rhythm in the writing. And again, this is the present, this is the past. So I deliberately added a scene change. I added a hyperlink because I could, it is theoretical. It is theoretically possible to not cause a scene change, to just continue this passage, like below the world shivers, just continue along with this text, right? But one of the affordances of interactive fiction is I can cause a scene shift. I can cause you to go to a different screen. The text from before will disappear. The new text will appear. The visuals from before will disappear. The visuals from the visuals of the new scene will appear, right? This active transition then in the story, which is going from the present to going to the past, is not just done. It's not just shown through the prose. It's also shown through the other trappings and the whole like scene, right? And so the use of the hyperlink is transportive in some way. It takes the reader to a different place, and so the act of clicking puts the reader into a new place, right? And you symbolize that not just through at the text level, but through the structural level by using this hyperlink as well, right? So you can do that. Another great example of this is the if many of you might be familiar with the interactive fiction game Birdland, where you dream about like birds, then you go into real life, which is their summer camp, and they use the author's name. I can't quite recall right now. It's really embarrassing. Sorry about that. Um, it uses scene shifts really well, right? You're going from the dream world to the real world. You click on the hyperlink, and the background changes, and the text changes, and the font changes, and you're like, oh, whoa! I have been transported to a new place, right? And I say this different from navigation because it's not just about, oh, I'm going to a new scene, but it's about signaling to the reader that yes, this is a new scene, and the hyperlinks can do that very, very effectively, right? And then finally, I told you we're going to revisit this idea of choices again, because for many people, this is not exclusively true, and this is of course also based specifically for choice-based interactive fiction, for like parser-based interactive fiction, where you're not clicking on choice, where you're like typing things in. This only applies partially, right? Because the way of linking is different. But hyperlinks allow you to make choices, right? It gives the player a certain sense of agency where they feel that they have control of the world they are in. Now, Again, this is not me saying that you must have choice. This isn't even me saying that having choice is inherently good, right? There are so many examples you can think of where constraining the choices for the reader is rhetorically interesting, right? Depression Quest is a famous one for that, right? Depression Quest is one of the games that started out the whole Gamergate movement. So look it up if you really want to. But Depression Quest is a very interesting game where the game um, prevents you from choosing certain things to show to you that, hey, you can't choose this because you are depressed. You cannot do this action, right? So choice design can be used rhetorically and poetically in many, many ways. So I want to spend some time on that because clicking on a choice can do a lot of things, and it is interesting to think about how to approach choices because it becomes a big part of hypertext and interactive fiction. And part of this talk was aimed at people who are interested in making interactive fiction as well. So I want to spend some time there. So first off, the main thing I want to think about is choices that feel meaningful. Notice my wording there. I didn't say choices that are meaningful. I said choices that feel meaningful, right? Because in many games, um, you can't really change the ending, right? In fact, many video games, such as the really famous Telltale game series, which for a while became very famous. The studio has since dissolved, but like they made things like The Walking Dead. They made like a Game of Thrones, and they made almost like interactive movie-like experiences, right? Um, and there, people at some point complained that, oh, your choices aren't actually meaningful. There are very few ways in which the endings can change. But that doesn't mean the games are bad. It also doesn't mean that people don't like the game, right? Those games were immensely popular, even though, again, the common thought is you must have 55 million endings to have an amazing game, right? Those games didn't do that very often. But what they did do was that they had choices that felt meaningful, right? They used various tricks. One of them being that sometimes text would pop up saying that choice was meaningful. They would say things like, Bob will remember that, right? So even though it didn't really affect later on, you thought it did. But also, what it did was it took you into moments that like side moments that made you feel that yes, you made a choice. So if you picked do this angrily or do this happily, you see yourself being angry or happy, and then it goes back to the exact same outcome, right? But this idea of having that tiny snippet where you can show yourself being angry or show yourself being happy, even if the ending is the same, makes the choice feel meaningful. Because remember, when you're playing the story, players don't just care about the ending. If they're playing a well-written story, they care about characters, they care about setting, they care about all kinds of things, right? And so these things that advance the character by like changing the mood or the way characters respond um, uh, lead to choices that feel meaningful, right? And again, actively having choices or having hyperlinks can add to this idea of I feel like I'm doing meaningful things in this interactive fiction game. Next, options that feel special. Something that I find when I teach my undergrads, for example, they might have a passage like, do you want to cast a magic spell on him, or do you want to get angry at him and walk away? Most of the time, players are going to pick the cast a magic spell on him, right? And so I tell people, if you have one option that feels really, really special and another that doesn't, most players are going to choose most players are going to choose the option that feels special, right? They're going to be, oh yeah, I'm playing this cool game. I'm going to pick that option, right? So I tell my students, when you're doing choice design, again, which many people think is a hallmark of hyperlinks and stuff in hypertext games, try and decide like, are there going to be some choices that people are going to gravitate to more? If so, why is the other thing even a choice? Or maybe I need to rephrase it, or maybe you do that for rhetorical effect. Like maybe the better option is not to use magic, for example, in that case. Okay. Non-choices is a thing where, let's say you can get in the car or you can walk away. click on walk away, then the character turns and says, no, you can't walk away from me, get in the car, and then it takes you back to get in the car, right? Again, that is tied to the idea that choice that feel meaningful, because that choice does not feel meaningful. It feels like the game made you choose something, right? Again, rhetorically effective if you want to, like, if you want that as an effect, like, yes, you are powerless, you have no ability to choose in this game. But when making choices, again, why are we having the hyperlink if it doesn't do anything for the player? Think about why it's there. Do you need to cut it? Don't just put hyperlink for the sake of putting them, right? So non-choices, and then frequency of choices. This talks about what I mentioned before about the length of passages. Like, do you have this thing about, oh, I need to quickly read to the skim through the text and click on the choice, and that is an impulse that happens very often in certain kinds of interactive fiction. So you have to keep in mind how often are players making choices that they feel that they're not reading passages that are too long, or they feel like they're doing stuff, they feel like they're having an effect, and why are they playing a game with choices and not a game, a prose piece. Now, again, this is not me being prescriptive. In the game I showed you a lot about before, Ghosts of oh my god, I forgot the title of my own game. Ghosts of Clothing Past. There's exactly one choice in the game. You make a choice at the beginning of the game about what clothing to wear on your date, and then the rest of the game continues that way, right? But I feel at least that that works in that game because A, the game is really short, and then the hyperlinks do a lot of other things. They do the whole past, present thing like I talked about, right? But that is something that you as a designer will want to think about when putting choices in your game. Okay, so that was a quick summary of choice design. There's a lot going on that I didn't want to spend all my time on because I wanted to leave some time for questions. I wanted to leave like 10 minutes-ish for questions. I have until 9:50. Sorry, 9:50 EST. You might be watching this in different time zones. That's the main thing I want to talk about. Again, that is me. That is one of my favorite images from a LARP that I was in. You can see me on the right. My name is Sharon Biswas. That is my Twitter. That is my HIO, where you can purchase some of my game, not all of them, because some of them are commissions and LARPs and things, or some of them aren't ready yet for purchase. And that's my website. Again, somewhat out of date. Thank you so much for the gift of your attention. I'm now going to stop sharing, and I'm going to look in the Discord and see if there are any questions. If there are not any questions, I'm going to hang out because I owe you this time until there are questions. And if you want to leave, feel free to leave. Otherwise, I'll just look pretty. So stop sharing. Stop sharing. Bam. Okay, I'm looking at my Discord now. Okay, so I am in Swooperton A. And great. So there are no questions so far. That might also mean no one is watching, which is an exciting prospect. But I will wait until I see any questions in the Discord in Superchin A. I'm not going to just keep jabbering away otherwise. So. Oh my God, do I see someone typing? Oh my God, someone's typing. Yay, a question. What are some of your favorite interactive fiction pieces at the moment? Do you use parser-based fiction much? Oh, thank you, great talk. Oh, thank you, Robbie. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And thank you, Kathleen. I'm glad you like that. So Robbie or Roby or something else that I'm butchering says, what are some of your favorite interactive fiction pieces at the moment? Do you use parser-based fiction much? So personally, I have not used. Oh, and thank you, Justin. That's also the thank you for your thank you. You're welcome, Justin B. So I have not used parser-based fiction much. I know how to use Inform, which is one of the major software applications used for parser-based fiction. If you're interested in making parser-based fiction, go into Inform. I think the latest is Inform 7. They have a lot of documentation on how to use it. I personally have not used it a lot, partially because I'm not the biggest fan of parser-based fiction. That's not to say, that is not me saying that parser-based fiction is bad. That is, I tend to get tired of parser-based fiction, which is the kind where you have to type in things because I often don't know what to type next. There's a whole vocabulary, and I often get lost, and I'm like, oh no, I don't know how to move forward, and so I get tired of that, right? So I don't do a lot of parser-based fiction. What are some of my favorite interactive fiction pieces at the moment? So I'm gonna say Swan Hill by Laura Miche is one that's really, really excellent. I'm going to type it in the Discord so that you can find it. If you just Google Swan Hill by Laura Miche, that's one that's really excellent. Another one is called it's a little story about you going. That's the one I showed the example of. It's about you going back to your hometown. You're now a wizard, and it's like about your relationship with your brother, and it's like really, really nice. There's this one called Open Sorcery by Abigail Korfman. Oh, you're welcome, Kath. Open Sorcery, there's like a mobile version and a Steam version. There are multiple different versions. In that game, you are playing you are a elemental of fire and C++. You are like a code-based magical entity that has all these tasks to do. It's a really excellent game. Abigail Corfman also does a really amazing thing where she creates a whole like visual language of this game without using any like illustrations, right? She uses font typography and type to make the sense of this computational world. It's really excellent. The puzzles are fun. That's a really, really great one. Another really good, I mean, obviously look for in fall at Strange Horizons, look for Strange Lust, Strange Love. I'm gonna type that because that's the one I co-edited, so that's gonna be a self-call. That's a whole anthology coming out. Another one that I really like Cactus Blue Motel and other works by the same author, by Astrid Dalmadi. There we go. It's like a coming of age story about with a bit of a supernatural bent. They have another one called Arcane Intern, unpaid, I think. That's really good. Even Cowgirls Bleed is an excellent one. I don't remember the author's name. Woe is me. And then I'll do a final one, which is the one I talked about for Birdland, is really good. But if you're interested, I would definitely go into Sub Q magazine. The magazine kind of stopped taking in new stories end of last year, but they're still open. You can go to the website all the time. They have a wonderful archive of really famous games, including, I should have always said, Queers in Love at the End of the World by Anna Anthropy is really, really excellent. It takes exactly 10 seconds to play. It's also really famous. You probably already know it. But yeah, go to SubQ Magazine. They have a nice collection of games, both by like newer authors and game designers, and also like well-known established gamers like Porpentine, like Ananthropy and things like that. Yours truly has 2 games on it, and there's also a lot of essays on how to make interactive fiction, how to analyze that interactive fiction, interviews with authors. I would absolutely look into SubQ Magazine. So yeah, awesome. I hope that answered your question. I can keep going on, but I want to, just keep going on and on. Thank you, Roby/Robbie, for that. Oh yeah, I will give you a thumbs for that question. And thank you everyone who enjoyed the talk and gave me the gift of their attention. There are 4 minutes left, so I will still stay here and answer any other questions anyone has. It can be about my work even. I don't feel, I'm an artist. I will not feel awkward about talking about my work. So feel free to ask or anything else. Otherwise, I'll just hang out in the area. Oh yeah, more questions. I love answering questions because I'm a professor and I like the sound of my own voice. Oh my God, thank you, Saren. I'm glad you found that insightful. Yeah, I was trying to gear it towards like people who are interested in designing because if you didn't know, Twine is a wonderful tool to design interactive fiction. That's one I primarily use. You can also look at Ink, another tool that's really good for choice-based fiction. You can look at Choice of Games. They're a company that has a lot of choice-based interactive fiction. They have their own proprietary tool called Choice Script. That's really, you have to learn it a bit more, but it's still really good. And if you're interested in parser-based stuff, look into Inform. Parser-based stuff, which is again part of it is when you type in stuff and not as much when you like click on options and things. These are all free. The choice script is proprietary, so you can't sell things in it. But Twine, Ink, and Inform, they're all free tools. Twine has a ton of documentation. Um, Ink has decent documentation. Inform has a lot of documentation about how to use that to make interactive fiction. That's really good. And you can see good examples, like I said, on SubQ Magazine or in Choice of Games, for example. Oh yeah, if you want, people said your favorite things. Oh sure, thank you, Nantelos. My favorite Choice of Games game, if you're interested in their catalog, is called The Fog Knows Your Name. That's a Choice of Games title. A disclaimer, it is written by Cleo Yansu Davis, who is my co-editor for Strange Lusts, Strange Loves, who is also a grad school friend of mine. We've been friends for a long time, so I'm biased, but it is one of my favorite games in the Choice of Games catalog. But check it out. They have like Nebula Award winning and a Nebula Award nominated game. They have like Natalia Theodorido, who has won a World Fantasy Award, has written games for them. They have some like really big name writers on their roster. So do check out Choice of Games. They have like novel length work. So while SubQ Magazine has like work that's like 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long, Choice of Games has stuff that are like 300,000 word stuff, right? So variation in length. Awesome. About a minute left. Any last minute questions? Let me know, and I will quickly answer. Otherwise, again, thank you for the gift of your attention. It's always cool to know that people think you're interesting and want to hear what you have to say. It's also cool to know that people actually take value from the talk you give and maybe use it. So Seren hopefully will take value from it. Hopefully be able to apply that to your own interactive fiction, whether or not if it's when you play and allows you to analyze and think about the fiction you're playing more, or when you design. So yeah. Thanks. I'm on a couple of other panels later in this in the conference. I'm on a panel about sex and games. I'm on a panel about academia and games, and I am on a panel about game criticism because I used to be a game journalist and I still write about games. So do check those out if you're interested. Otherwise, have a good rest of your time.